I want you to close your eyes for just a moment and imagine this. You're lying in a hospital bed, unable to breathe on your own. A tube down your throat connected to a machine that's doing the breathing for you. Doctors are telling your family to prepare for the worst. Your lungs have shut down completely, and medically speaking, there's nothing more they can do. That was me. That was my reality. But what the doctors said was impossible, God said was possible. And today, I'm standing here, breathing freely, living proof that miracles still happen. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you believe in the power of prayer and God's healing, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs a miracle today. My name is Rebecca Thompson. I'm 35 years old and I live on the south side of Chicago, Illinois. 3 years ago, I was in the intensive care unit at the University of Chicago Medical Center, my lungs completely destroyed by pneumonia, doctors telling my husband and my children to say their goodbyes. But God had other plans. This is my testimony of how God breathed life back into me when everyone else had given up hope. I grew up in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, in a strong, faith-filled family. My grandmother was a prayer warrior, the kind of woman who would get up at 5 o'clock every morning to pray for hours before the sun came up. My mother sang in the church choir, and my father was a deacon. Church wasn't just something we did on Sundays. It was the center of our lives, the foundation of our family. I grew up hearing testimonies of God's healing power, of miracles, of divine intervention. But I never imagined I'd have my own testimony to share. I was a healthy kid, active, played basketball in high school, never had any major health issues. After graduating, I went to Chicago State University and got my degree in elementary education. I became a third-grade teacher at a public school in Inglewood, one of the most challenging neighborhoods in Chicago. I loved those kids. Many of them came from difficult circumstances, broken homes, poverty, violence. But when they walked into my classroom, I wanted them to feel safe, loved, seen. I wanted to give them hope. I met my husband Marcus at church when I was 24. He was a firefighter, strong, kind, devoted to God and to serving others. We fell in love, got married a year later, and started building our life together. We bought a small house in Chatham, joined the church where we'd met, and started a family. We have 3 beautiful children. Jeremiah is 12, Aaliyah is 9, and Isaiah is 6. Being a mother is the greatest joy of my life. For years, everything was good. We had our struggles like any family. Money was sometimes tight on a teacher's and firefighter's salary. The neighborhood was getting rougher, and we worried about keeping our kids safe. But we had each other. We had our faith, and we had our church community. We were content, grateful, living a simple but meaningful life. Everything changed in February 3 years ago. It started with what I thought was just a bad cold. I woke up one morning feeling exhausted, with a scratchy throat and a slight cough. I figured I'd picked up something from one of my students. Kids bring all kinds of germs into the classroom, and teachers get sick all the time. I took some over-the-counter medicine and went to work. But over the next few days, instead of getting better, I got worse. The cough became more severe, deep, and painful. I developed a fever that wouldn't break no matter how much medicine I took. I was so exhausted I could barely get out of bed. Marcus begged me to go to the doctor, but I kept saying I'd be fine, that it was just the flu, that I needed to rest. By the 4th day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was having trouble breathing, like there was a weight on my chest pressing down. Marcus drove me to the emergency room at the University of Chicago Medical Center. They took one look at me, checked my oxygen levels, and immediately admitted me. The chest x-ray showed that I had severe pneumonia in both lungs. They started me on IV antibiotics and gave me oxygen through a nasal cannula. The doctor said I'd probably need to stay in the hospital for a few days while the antibiotics did their work. Marcus stayed with me that first night, holding my hand, praying over me. Our pastor came to visit and anointed me with oil, praying for my healing. I remember feeling scared but also confident that God was going to heal me, that I'd be home with my babies in a few days. But I didn't get better. I got worse, much worse. By the 2nd day, my oxygen levels were dropping despite the supplemental oxygen. They moved me to the intensive care unit and put me on a high-flow oxygen system, but my lungs were so inflamed and filled with fluid that oxygen wasn't getting into my bloodstream the way it should. I was working so hard to breathe, using every muscle in my chest and abdomen, and I was exhausted. I remember looking at Marcus and seeing the fear in his eyes, and that's when I realized how serious this was. On the third day, my breathing became so labored that the doctors said they needed to intubate me and put me on a mechanical ventilator. They explained that my body was working too hard to breathe and that I needed to rest while the machine did the breathing for me. I was terrified. I'd seen patients on ventilators during visits to church members in the hospital, and I knew it was serious. But the doctors said it was necessary to save my life. They sedated me heavily, inserted a breathing tube down my throat, and connected me to the ventilator. From that point on, I don't remember much. I was unconscious for the next 9 days, completely unaware of what was happening around me. But my family remembers every agonizing moment, and they've told me the story many times since. The pneumonia was incredibly aggressive. Despite maximum doses of multiple antibiotics, my lungs continued to deteriorate. They became so inflamed and filled with fluid and pus that they couldn't absorb oxygen, even with the ventilator pumping air into them at maximum settings. The medical term is acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. My lungs were essentially shutting down, dying. The doctors tried everything. They put me on my stomach, a technique called proning, to help open up different parts of my lungs. They adjusted the ventilator settings constantly, trying to find the right balance. They added more medications, more interventions, but nothing was working. My oxygen levels kept dropping. My organs were starting to fail from lack of oxygen, and the medical team was running out of options. On the 5th day, the lead doctor, a pulmonologist named Dr. Anderson, called Marcus and my parents into a private room. He told them that my condition was critical, that my lungs were not responding to treatment, and that they needed to prepare for the worst. He said that if things didn't turn around in the next 24 to 48 hours, there was a very real possibility that I wouldn't survive. He explained that they could try putting me on ECMO, a machine that would oxygenate my blood outside my body, but that it was a last resort with significant risks. And even then, there was no guarantee. Marcus told me later that when he heard those words, "Prepare for the worst," his entire world collapsed. He walked out of that meeting, went to the hospital chapel, fell on his face before God, and cried out like he'd never cried before. He said, "God, you gave her to me. You blessed me with this woman, with our children, with our family. I'm not ready to let her go. Please, God, if you're willing, heal her. Breathe life back into her lungs. We need her. I need her. Our children need their mother." Word spread quickly through our church and community. Our pastor put out a prayer alert, and within hours, hundreds of people were praying. They organized prayer vigils at the church, people praying around the clock, interceding for my healing. Friends, family, church members, even people who didn't know me personally but had heard about my situation, they all prayed. My grandmother, 87 years old at the time, told everyone, "God is going to heal my grandbaby. I've been praying too long and too hard for him not to answer." If this testimony is encouraging you, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment sharing your own story of God's healing power. Your testimony could inspire someone else who's facing a medical crisis. On the 6th day, my children were brought to the hospital to see me. The doctors thought it might be the last time they'd see their mother alive, and they wanted to give them a chance to say goodbye. Jeremiah, who was 9 at the time, held my hand and prayed over me. He said, "Mommy, I know you can't hear me, but I love you, and I'm praying that Jesus heals you because we need you. Please don't leave us." Aaliyah, who was 6, climbed up on the bed and laid her head on my chest, crying. And little Isaiah, who was only 3, kept asking Marcus, "When is Mommy waking up? When can we go home?" That night, the 7th night, was the darkest. My oxygen levels were dangerously low despite maximum support from the ventilator. My blood pressure was dropping, and my kidneys were starting to fail. The medical team had a meeting with my family and said that they'd done everything medically possible. And now it was in God's hands. They asked if my family wanted to authorize a do not resuscitate order, meaning that if my heart stopped, they wouldn't try to revive me. Marcus refused. He said, "No, we serve a God of resurrection. You keep fighting and we'll keep praying." But even Marcus admitted later that he went home that night feeling defeated, feeling like he was about to lose his wife. He gathered our children, and they prayed together as a family. He said they cried out to God with everything they had, asking for a miracle, asking for divine intervention, asking God to do what the doctors said was impossible, and that's when God showed up. On the morning of the 8th day, something shifted. The nurses noticed that my oxygen levels were starting to stabilize. Not dramatically, but just slightly better than they'd been. By the afternoon, they were continuing to improve. Slowly, gradually, my lungs were starting to respond. The doctors couldn't explain it. The pneumonia that had been so aggressive, so resistant to treatment, was finally starting to retreat. The inflammation in my lungs was decreasing, and they were beginning to absorb oxygen again. Dr. Anderson came into my room, looked at the monitors, looked at my charts, and shook his head in disbelief. He told Marcus, "I don't understand what's happening here. Based on everything we know medically, her lungs should not be recovering. But they are. This is beyond medicine. This is something else." Over the next 2 days, my improvement continued. My oxygen levels kept rising. The ventilator settings were gradually reduced as my lungs took over more of the work of breathing. On the 9th day, the doctors felt confident enough to try waking me up and removing the breathing tube. They stopped the sedation, and I slowly regained consciousness. I remember the moment I opened my eyes. Everything was blurry, confusing. I didn't know where I was or what had happened. There was a tube down my throat, and I couldn't talk, couldn't move. I saw Marcus standing next to my bed, tears streaming down his face, and he leaned down close to me and said, "Baby, you're going to be okay." God answered our prayers. You're going to be okay. They removed the breathing tube later that day, and I took my first breath on my own in over a week. It was painful. My throat was raw, my chest ached, but I was breathing. I was alive. The doctors and nurses were amazed. They kept using the word remarkable, saying that my recovery was remarkable, unexpected, medically unexplainable. I stayed in the ICU for 3 more days as they monitored me closely, making sure my lungs continued to function properly. Then I was moved to a regular hospital room for another week of recovery. Physical therapists worked with me to rebuild my strength because I'd been bedridden for so long. I was weak, could barely walk across the room without getting exhausted, but I was alive, and that's all that mattered. My children came to visit me every day, and the joy on their faces, the relief in their eyes was overwhelming. Jeremiah told me that he'd prayed every single night, asking God to heal his mommy. Aaliyah made me cards and drawings that covered the walls of my hospital room, and Isaiah, my baby, just wanted to sit in my lap and hold me, as if he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. The medical team ran extensive tests to understand what had happened. They did CT scans of my lungs, blood work, cultures, everything they could think of, and what they found was astonishing. The pneumonia was completely gone. The severe inflammation and damage that had been destroying my lungs had healed. Dr. Anderson told me, "In all my years of practicing medicine, I've never seen lungs recover like this. You should have permanent scarring, reduced lung capacity, long-term respiratory issues, but your lungs look almost completely normal. This is a miracle. There's no other word for it." I was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks, and I went home to my family, to my life. The first Sunday I was strong enough. We went back to church, and our pastor called me up to the front to share my testimony. The entire congregation stood and applauded, praising God for his healing power. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, and I told them, God is real. Miracles are real. When the doctors said prepare for the worst, God said prepare for the best. He breathed life back into me, and I will spend the rest of my days praising him and telling others about his goodness. My recovery continued over the next several months. I had to do pulmonary rehabilitation to rebuild my lung strength and capacity. I worked with physical therapists to regain my stamina and endurance. It was hard work, but I was motivated because I'd been given a second chance at life, and I wasn't going to waste it. Within 4 months, I was back in my classroom, teaching my 3rd graders, loving on them, pouring into them. The kids were so excited to have me back. Many of them had made get-well cards and had been praying for me. I told them, age-appropriately, about what had happened, about how God had healed me, and I wanted them to know that prayer is powerful, that God hears us, that miracles still happen. My experience changed me in profound ways. I don't take a single breath for granted anymore. Every morning when I wake up and fill my lungs with air, I thank God for the gift of life. I'm more present with my family, more intentional about the time I spend with them. I'm more bold in my faith, more willing to share my testimony, more confident in God's power to do the impossible. I've also become an advocate for prayer in healthcare. I've spoken at medical conferences, sharing my story with doctors and nurses, encouraging them to recognize that there are things beyond medical science, that faith and prayer play a role in healing that we don't fully understand. Many healthcare professionals have told me that my story has changed the way they view their patients, that it's reminded them to treat the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. Our church has organized prayer teams that go to hospitals to pray for patients, with their permission, of course. I'm part of that ministry now, visiting people in ICU beds just like I was in, holding their hands, praying over them, telling them that God is still in the healing business. I've seen other miracles, other testimonies of God's power, and it strengthens my faith every single time. 3 years have passed since that experience, and I'm healthier now than I was before I got sick. My lungs function at full capacity. I have no lingering effects, no scarring, no complications. I recently had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Anderson, and he looked at my latest chest x-ray and just shook his head in wonder. He said, "Rebecca, you are a walking miracle. There's no medical explanation for your recovery. All I can say is that something beyond medicine intervened in your case. Please don't scroll past this without sharing. Someone in your life needs to hear this testimony today. Someone is in a hospital room right now facing a devastating diagnosis, and they need to know that our God is still a miracle-working God." Share this video right now. I think about that 9th day often, the day I woke up and took my first breath on my own. I think about how close I came to death, how the doctors had essentially given up hope, how my family was preparing to say goodbye, and I think about how God showed up in that ICU room and defied every medical expectation. He breathed life back into my lungs, just like he breathed life into Adam in the Garden of Eden. The same God who spoke the universe into existence spoke healing into my body. People ask me sometimes if I was angry at God for allowing me to get so sick in the first place. And honestly, that question never even crossed my mind. I don't believe God made me sick. I believe I live in a fallen world where sickness and disease exist. But I do believe that God used my sickness for his glory, to show his power, to strengthen the faith of everyone who witnessed my healing, to give me a testimony that could encourage others. There's a verse in the Bible that has become my life verse. It's from Psalm 118, verse 17, and it says, "I will not die but live, and will proclaim what the Lord has done." That's my story. I didn't die. God preserved my life, and now I live to proclaim what he's done, to tell everyone who will listen that our God is mighty, that he hears our prayers, that he still performs miracles today. My husband Marcus tells people all the time that those 9 days when I was in the ICU were the hardest days of his life. He said there were moments when he felt his faith wavering, when he was tempted to believe what the doctors were saying, that I wasn't going to make it. But he kept coming back to God's promises, kept reminding himself of all the times God had been faithful in the past, kept choosing to believe that God could do a miracle even when circumstances said otherwise. And God honored that faith. My grandmother, the prayer warrior, said she never doubted for a moment that I'd be healed. She said she'd seen God do too many impossible things in her 87 years to doubt him now. She prayed with a confidence and authority that only comes from a lifetime of walking with God, of seeing him answer prayers, of trusting him completely. She's 90 years old now, and she still gets up at 5 in the morning to pray. She says she's praying for the next generation, praying that they'll see God's power like she has, praying that they'll have their own testimonies to share. The impact of my testimony has reached far beyond my immediate family and church. I've been interviewed by Christian media outlets, invited to speak at conferences and churches around the country. I've received messages from people all over the world who've heard my story and been encouraged by it. People facing their own medical crises, people who needed hope, people who needed to be reminded that God is still in control. One woman wrote to me and said that she was in the hospital with her daughter, who had been in a severe car accident and was on life support. The doctors were saying there was no hope, but she had heard my testimony, and it gave her the faith to keep praying, to keep believing. 3 weeks later, she wrote again to tell me that her daughter had woken up and was recovering. She said, "Your story saved my daughter's life because it gave me the faith to not give up." That's the power of testimony. When we share what God has done in our lives, it builds faith in others. It reminds people that we serve a miracle-working God who hasn't changed, who's still powerful, who's still good. My story isn't special because of me. It's special because of God, because of what he did, because of his love and his power. I still teach 3rd grade at the same school in Englewood. Those kids are still my heart, my passion. But now I teach them with an even greater sense of purpose and gratitude. I tell them all the time that they're loved, that they're valuable, that God has a plan for their lives. I pray for them. I believe in them. I invest in them, because I know firsthand that life is precious, that tomorrow isn't guaranteed, and that every day is a gift. My children have been deeply impacted by what happened. They learned at a young age about the power of prayer, about faith, about trusting God even when things look impossible. Jeremiah wants to be a doctor now. He says he wants to help people the way the doctors helped his mom, but he also wants to pray with his patients because he knows that healing comes from God. Aaliyah prays for everyone. She prays for her classmates, her teachers, people she sees on the street. She has such a tender heart and such strong faith. And Isaiah, my baby, tells everyone he meets that Jesus healed his mommy. I've learned so much through this experience. I've learned that God's timing is perfect, even when we don't understand it. I've learned that trials can strengthen our faith in ways that good times never could. I've learned that community matters, that we need people around us who will pray for us, believe for us, stand with us in our darkest hours. I've learned that medical science is amazing, but there are limits to what medicine can do, and beyond those limits is where God operates. I've also learned to cherish every moment. I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. I don't stress about things that don't matter. I focus on what's important: my relationship with God, my family, serving others, living with purpose. Because I've stood at death's door, and I've seen how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change. And that perspective has transformed the way I live. There's a song we sing at church that says, "Every breath I breathe, you've given me. Every moment of my life is a gift from you." I sing those words with my whole heart now, because I know they're true. Every breath truly is a gift. For 9 days I couldn't breathe on my own. A machine had to breathe for me. And when God restored my ability to breathe, when He healed my lungs and gave me back my life, I realized that breath is a miracle we take for granted every single day. The medical team that treated me still keeps in touch. Dr. Anderson emails me every few months to check on me, and he always says the same thing: "You're my favorite miracle story." The nurses who cared for me during those critical days have told me that my case changed them, that it reminded them why they went into healthcare in the first place, to witness moments of hope and healing, and to be part of something bigger than themselves. 3 years later, I'm still here. I'm still breathing. I'm still living. I'm still praising God for His goodness and His mercy. The doctor said prepare for the worst, but God said prepare for a miracle, and that's exactly what He delivered. He breathed life back into my dying lungs. He defied medical science. He answered the prayers of hundreds of people who cried out to Him on my behalf. If you're facing a medical crisis right now, if you're in that hospital room, if the doctors are giving you bad news, I want you to hear me clearly. Don't give up. Keep praying. Keep believing. Keep trusting that God can do the impossible. Gather your family, your friends, your church community around you, and ask them to pray with you and for you. Because prayer changes things. Faith moves mountains. And God still performs miracles. I'm living proof. The doctors said my lungs had shut down, that there was nothing more they could do, that my family should prepare for the worst. But God had the final word. And His word was life. His word was healing. His word was restoration. He breathed into me again, just like He breathed life into Adam. Just like He breathed life into Lazarus when He called him out of the tomb. Just like He continues to breathe life into every person who calls on His name. Thank you for listening to my testimony. Thank you for allowing me to share what God has done in my life. My prayer is that this story has encouraged you, strengthened your faith, reminded you that nothing is impossible with God. If this testimony blessed you, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear this message today. Someone needs to know that miracles still happen, that God still heals, that there is hope, even in the darkest circumstances. You are loved. You are seen. You are not alone. The same God who healed me can heal you. The same God who breathed life back into my lungs can breathe life into whatever situation you're facing. Trust Him, believe Him, call on Him. He will answer. He will show up. He will do exceedingly, abundantly more than you could ask or imagine. God bless you. May you experience the same miracle, the same healing, the same restoration that I've experienced. May you know beyond any doubt that God is real, that He loves you, and that He has the power to change your circumstances in an instant. Keep the faith. Keep believing. Keep hoping. Your miracle is on the way.